Our correspondent Rachel Morgan has travelled out to the island reserve of Skoma to assess the dangers facing wildlife there.
Environmentalists out on the Ocean Defender surveying the protected habitats of Skoma Island. Hundreds of black-backed gulls are now returning to the oil-rimmed rocks to breed. These initial inspections proved better than expected. But turning back to land, a 5-mile oil slick pouring from the starboard side of the Sea Empress flowed right across our path.
I have been in the petrochemical industry for about 25 years and I have never seen a slick that was, to be honest with you, it was not controlled. There did not seem to be any booms around it. The only thing that was being done to prevent the slick from going anywhere was spraying by aircraft. It just seemed to be totally out of control.
Behind me is Freshwater West, one of the most beautiful beaches in this area. But around here the water is oily, the spray is coming up brown and the slick is extending right out. There seems very little chance now that the whole of this south coast won't be contaminated.
Sortie after sortie of Dakota are still spraying the slick. But after 6 days of watching and waiting for some positive results, local wildlife experts are now at a loss.
I'm appalled. We've come through a huge slick of oil. There's a massive quantity of oil leaked out, and we've seen the planes going over one after the other, spraying dispersant on it. I mean, that's another poisonous substance being thrown into the sea on top of the oil.
A huge salvage operation tonight managed to float the tanker Sea Empress clear of the rocks, where it's been stranded off the Welsh coast. 12 tugs are towing it to a safer location where the remaining oil in its holds can be offloaded to another tanker. But more than 60,000 tonnes of crude have already spewed into the sea. Latest reports say thick oil has spread nearly 20 miles to the east, reaching Carmarthen Bay, and a thinner slick has moved miles out to sea.
At about 7 o'clock this evening, the Sea Empress broke free, hauled off the rocks that had trapped her. The crews on the salvage tugs will hope to tow her to safety and unload her remaining oil. But even if they succeed, she's already shed 70,000 tonnes and is still losing oil fast. Pressure sprayers washed down one of the few beaches where oil has come ashore, but small road tankers like this are no match for the Sea Empress. The ship's leaking tens of thousands of tonnes of oil. Here, they measure the clean-up in gallons.
About 8,000 on Monday and about 6,000 to 8,000 yesterday.
Among the oil's first casualties is this duck. It's been lucky. But the local rescue centre says that if the number of oiled birds reaches, as expected, hundreds or thousands, they'll have to send them to the RSPCA in Somerset.
We've only got 2 washing stations, and as you've seen, washing the birds, they can take from an hour to an hour and a half for each bird. Well, if you have hundreds of birds, that's, as you see, we just could not cope with them.
The local fishermen are already suffering. Their boats sit idle in harbour. Foreign buyers don't want contaminated shellfish in a market worth 20 million a year. Now there's a voluntary ban on fishing, the oil boom a token barrier between boats and sea.
It is a disaster for them at this stage. They're going to suffer terribly. The future does not look good for them at all.
For the crews on the salvage tugs, tonight's success is a reward for 6 days and nights of constant danger and hard work. But for their managers, the recriminations about why there were so many bungled rescue attempts are just beginning.
Over the last few days, the priority of the authorities has been simply to get the ship off the rocks. That's understandable from some points of view, but actually that has been at the expense of pouring the oil into the environment. So it's clear that saving the ship has been more important than trying to save the cargo and protect the environment.
Hundreds more seabirds covered in oil from the tanker Sea Empress have been washed up on beaches all round the Pembrokeshire coast. There's now a heavy oil slick hugging the coast around Milford Haven. A light sheen of oil stretches from Ramsey Island to Carmarthen Bay and north of Lundy Island. One of the worst hit areas is Pendine Sands, near the holiday resort of Tenby.
The extent of the pollution was illustrated clearly today along the whole of the Carmarthen Bay.
with beaches around Tenby particularly affected. Some of the worst areas are 20 miles from the original spillage. Hundreds of birds have been left stranded, others have been rescued and taken to treatment centres, but for many it was too late. When they saw the oil washed up in thick black streaks this morning, local people were quick to join in the clean-up operation.
He was up on top of the beach, right up the beach, and this one's dead.
There was a similar picture on the island of Lundy off the North Devon coast. The Marine Nature Reserve is a nesting site for thousands of seabirds, and many were just beginning to return to the steep cliffs to breed.
Well, I came down very early this morning. It was high tide, and sort of in a line along the shore there were guillemots really, all the way along the shore.
Meanwhile, pumping has started at the source of the spillage, the Sea Empress. The remaining oil in her tanks is being transferred to a smaller vessel, the Star Bergham. It's expected to take at least 28 hours. Tonight, the Labour MP for Pembroke, Nick Ainger, claimed that some of the worst damage could have been avoided if the salvagers had acted on advice given by the pilot of the Sea Empress at key stages of the rescue operation. But as salvage efforts continue, the full cost to wildlife is only just being realised.
With its 140-odd rivers and streams, Yorkshire seems awash with water. There's water everywhere, but still, at times, not enough to drink. During last summer's drought, Huddersfield in West Yorkshire was the worst-hit town in the worst-hit county. And it's still the most vulnerable if there's another shortage this year. Water is now a precious commodity. Ricky Snow and his family have faced restrictions on using water for months.
I got a hose pipe for my wedding present last year. It's brand new. I've never been able to use it. You're not allowed to wash the car. We use water from the bath to water the plants.
His allotment should have provided vegetables for the family last year, but they died through lack of water. He's not going to stock it this year.
I used to enjoy doing it. The kids used to enjoy it because I used to pickle onions and potatoes and everything. People should be able to just use water when they want. The people, that's what they pay for. The amount of taxes and everything else we pay for the service. So I think we should have it when we want to use it, not when we're told to use it.
But he may not have a choice. The prospect of climate change brings the threat of more droughts in future and the need to conserve water supplies. Here in Yorkshire, they've suffered more than most. And if the reservoir levels stay this low, they could be heading for another drought this summer. Now more than ever, the privatised water companies are having to juggle the competing interests of their shareholders, their customers, and the environment. The question is, should they invest more, charge more, or raid the rivers for water?
Customers have got to grapple with what the bottom line is. If customers want what I believe they want, which is a secure supply of water, that requires a standard that needs to be set given all the issues around like climate change. That also carries a cost.
Part of this cost will be borne by the rivers. A long-term solution to Yorkshire's water shortage would be to pipe in supplies from Northumberland. But in the short term, the cheapest option is to get drought orders to take water from local rivers or reduce flows into them from reservoirs.
So this reservoir takes years to fill. So they've used up several years' make of water, isn't that?
At this drought hearing, the company's applying to restrict water flowing into the River Don. The two camps are out in force, environmentalists and Yorkshire Water, plotting their strategy.
Every litre of water you take from the environment affects the watercourses, affects the streams. It dries up riverbeds, it means that the fish don't spawn, it means the insects on which the fish feed on die out, it means that otters don't have places to hunt.
Stuart Crofts fishes the River Don, and he's worried about how the drought order will affect it.
20 years ago, the river just here was just basically an open sewer. There was very little fish life in it, if any at all. And in the last 20 years, our association took over the river and transformed it.
Some stretches of the river are still polluted. An old mine shaft spews out effluent. Fishermen worry any reduction in flow will exacerbate its effects, but they face stark choices.
We originally put an objection into this drought order. Unfortunately, we've had to withdraw that objection, basically because if we'd have carried on fighting it and we'd have actually won, the reservoir would have run out of water sometime in mid-July, so we'd end up literally with a dry river rather than a drastically reduced river.
During last year's drought, extra water from rivers was not enough. Supplies had to be tankered in at a cost of £47 million. Standpipes were on standby, and bottled water had to be shipped in. There are still problems. An inquiry to report later this week is expected to be highly critical of Yorkshire's performance, and to conclude there needs to be a wider debate.
Building new reservoirs isn't necessarily going to be necessary or even the best way for managing resources in the future. Increasingly over the recent years, attention has focused more on demand management, where through things such as metering and restrictions on use of hose pipes and so on, the demand for water is managed to keep it within the amount that can be supplied, rather than continually trying to supply more and more water.
Yorkshire Water has brought in a new man at the top to win back customers' confidence and to persuade them to value water.
I've got to make sure that we put in place a system of water supply that fixes that loss of confidence by an assurance that you can get water out the tap for all essential uses when it's necessary. What we have to also look at is water is an extremely valuable resource. We have to conserve it, and we have to be sensible in the way we use it.
Meanwhile, Yorkshire Water is trying to make up for lost time. They've announced total investment of £170 million this year, and tackling leaks has been given top priority.
Yep.
Work's going on round the clock to plug them.
Just to go into Gunn's Lane. There we are.
32% of Yorkshire's water is now lost through leakage, one of the highest rates in the country. Plans to contract out this work have been dropped, and instead the number of leak detectives has been increased to 100. It's midnight and Danny and Mike have just started their shift. Tonight they're checking reports of a leak in a residential road near Huddersfield.
That's not a bad sound. Good sound. Yeah, let's have a listen.
So why'd you come out at night?
Because it's quieter, less people about, less people using water, and less traffic. Just the occasional owl that you can hear.
How high a priority is leak detection at the moment?
Extremely high.
Yorkshire Water held back £19 million from a planned repairs programme last year, boosting profits to £142 million before tax. Customers suspect that shareholders and profits come first. Which is the first priority?
Customers.
In what respect?
In that we have to maintain the water supply and confidence and loyalty of our customers, because last year has shown without it, then shareholders begin clearly to get nervous. So if you're going to generate a long-term shareholder return, make sure you've got the money to invest in the infrastructure. You've got to have the confidence and support of your customers.
Consumers have yet to be won over, but others have been brought on board. Having accepted the need for drought orders, the Environment Agency sends out electro-fishing crews to monitor their effects. Looking for signs of damage from pollution, they generate electricity to stun and catch the fish.
Got one.
Forced to choose, even the environmentalists recognise people come before fish.
There's a balance that has to be struck between a risk of shortages, which means for the public hosepipe bans, possibly in the extreme standpipes or rotor cuts, as against developing new resources, building new reservoirs, which will hit the environment and cause customers increased bills. In addition, the other alternative is for the public to cut down their use of water. At some point, the debate has to take place and some suitable balance has to be found.
High streets have had a grim decade as shoppers deserted to out-of-town supermarkets, shopping malls and retail parks. Consumers are attracted by the warmth and convenience of everything under one roof. Shopkeepers in towns see the spectre of terminal decline. The government will shortly issue new planning guidelines designed to halt the rush to build out of town, but a number of towns in Britain are already studying an American scheme to save the city centre. Niels Blythe reports.
Ward's clothes shop isn't the only casualty here. 15 of the 50 shops on Gravesend High Street are now empty. What was once a busy shopping street looks in parts like a war zone. And each boarded-up shopfront makes life harder for its neighbours. Selling cake decorations and cards was once a thriving business for Yvonne Howland. Now she finds the high street intimidating, and she too wants to get out.
Well, we've had the windows smashed 6 times last year, 4 times just to smash the windows and twice to actually break in. I close at 4 o'clock every day because the majority of our customers are women and they don't like walking down this high street because it's so deserted.
Not many high streets have declined as obviously as Gravesend's, but lots of traditional town centres are finding life increasingly difficult. The pattern of events is always the same. The big stores move to the edge of town, shoppers come to the centre less often, and a spiral of decline begins. The nightmare is that it ends with streets that look like this.
Cars have changed the way we shop. Edge-of-town supermarkets, retail parks, and just across the Thames from Gravesend, there's one of the biggest shopping malls in Britain, Lakeside. It has all the things which have made out-of-town shopping so successful. A planned mixture of shops, entertainment for children, safe surroundings and fast food. Even cinemas, for when you've shopped till you dropped. And Gravesend now faces a double whammy. Head back across the QE2 bridge from Lakeside, and right next to the town, they're building Blue Water, yet another shopping centre. In less than 3 years' time, this former chalk pit will be the largest shopping mall in Europe. It could be one of the last of its kind. Planning rules have been changed to make out-of-town development more difficult in future, but there's still a lot of building underway across the country.
We have 3 department stores anchoring the scheme: Marks & Spencer's, John Lewis and House of Fraser. And in between, there'll be 250 other stores in a triangular mall joining all 3 department stores, with the parking and the landscaping going right up to the edge of the buildings.
The impact of out-of-town shopping is now monitored in detail by experts like Nicholas Falk. Not all Gravesend has done as badly as the old High Street, but he believes the problems facing town centre shops require urgent attention.
If we don't do a lot more than we're doing at the moment, we'll see many more shops and businesses close. We'll see an awful lot of jobs lost in the process. We'll see the heart of our towns dying, and we'll see places that become frightening to go into by day and by night.
And in the search for solutions to the town centre crisis, Nicholas Falk and others are turning their attentions abroad.
26 degrees. KYW News, this traffic and transit update. Infinity brings back $3.99 a month with no down payment. In Philadelphia, the chess match between man and machine resumes. It's all tied.
Philadelphia, USA. An unlikely place to look for lessons on reviving the British high street. After all, American inner cities are famous for dirt and decay, and they used to call this Filthydelphia. But now the shopping streets are so spick and span, the pigeons can't find a decent breakfast.
Show where the locations of aggressive panhandling and on-street feeding are and correlate that.
Paul Levy leads the team that's transformed the area known as Centre City. And while he holds his regular morning meeting, his hit squads are already at work. On these once mean streets, graffiti is blown away as soon as it appears. And on almost every corner, there's a cleaner sweeping litter or cigarette ends.
Okay, assignments. Morley, 632. Garrett, 636. Reisinger, 638.
Roll call in the police precinct, and the officers are getting their assignments for the day. But standing behind them are Paul Levy's team of community service representatives. They also patrol the streets, unarmed, but a uniformed force to reassure the shoppers.
I sent a letter to all the hotel general managers who've given us their complaints.
It's a never-ending campaign for Paul Levy, and it's all paid for by local shops and property owners determined to improve their district.
Here in 5 minutes. They'll be here in 5 minutes.
On the streets, the patrolmen don't act like police, but they can call the cops at the first hint of trouble.
I'm not talking to you.
I'm a man of God. Don't play with me. Devil's alive. Stop the sand.
Wherever there's a disturbance, they turn up in numbers to make shoppers feel as safe as they would in one of the 17 shopping malls which surround Centre City.
We're constantly in competition with privately controlled spaces that are in out-of-town shopping centers that are private property, very clean, very secure, and so people are constantly comparing. Well, I can shop in the shopping center and park for free and be in a completely enclosed space, which is private property with security guards, or I can walk in the town center where there's litter on the street and I don't feel safe and it's not well lit. So we are constantly comparing ourselves against the out-of-town shopping centers.
The next phase for Paul Levy is a project to smarten the sidewalks.
The philosophy of this project is not going to be to rip up every sidewalk in Center City if it's already in good condition. We want to carry out a conservation strategy, and we've tried out here on our demonstration.
The money to pay for all the Centre City improvements is raised by a special kind of tax. It had to be approved by a vote among local property owners. But in a country where tax cutting is a national obsession, it's won almost unanimous support. Philadelphia is one of the pioneers of the so-called business improvement districts. Now hundreds of towns across America are following its example. And the supporters of these schemes argue that the secret of their success is the special tax. Once it's been agreed, every business in the area has to pay it. And that, it's claimed, is the only way that you can create the kind of big budgets that are needed if town centres are going to compete with out-of-town shopping. In Philadelphia, the Centre City scheme has led to a fall in the number of empty shops in the area. And for shopkeeper Nancy Gold, it's made all the difference.
If it hadn't changed, I would not have invested and moved into what we call here the high rent district. If we hadn't done it, I'm clear that we would have seen the demise of the inner city. We saved the city. There's no question that Center City was saved by this tax.
Sprucing up the streets now goes on round the clock. And in Philadelphia, they believe there are useful lessons that Britain could learn.
Out-of-town shopping centers are far better funded than town centers, and if town centers cannot put in place a funding mechanism to equal that, they're going to lose their competitive edge. I think secondly, businesses need to understand that this is not a charitable contribution. This is a business investment to improve the business environment, which has really reaped dividends for businesses here in Philadelphia.
The Philadelphia story is now set to become a model for some British cities.
What we're looking at here is a public space that isn't a public
This is Bristol, and John Lever is on secondment from Marks & Spencer's to act as town centre manager. His job is to plan a high street fight back against a huge shopping centre now being built outside the city. Local retailers have seen the effect of these developments elsewhere and are preparing their defences.
This is basically the centre of Broadmead. It's called the podium area. We have a completely new re-landscaping, repaving scheme, which will be most attractive finished by April. That's phase one.
To be ready for the competition, John Lever needs to raise £12 million, half of it coming from the private sector. It's not just for smartening up the public areas. He wants uniformed wardens, as in Philadelphia, better use of car parks, and a new street market to make the most of a historic setting.
I think because of the out-of-town experience in other centres around the UK and in America, retailers now realise they have to band together, work together to have a united force that can tackle some of these issues.
But while the principle is simple, raising the money in British town centres is complicated. John Lever spends most of his time passing the hat round local businesses.
Cameras are approximately £8,000 each, but it's the old story, can we get enough money raised?
Do you think that you can carry on in the way that you are of relying solely on voluntary contributions?
No, voluntary contributions are not the answer to a scheme as large as this, and they're not the answer to city centres in the future where you have to raise substantial levels of money to be able to maintain and improve the facilities and the environment for the public. You have to find a more imaginative way of dealing with it.
John Lever is backing a Philadelphia-style business improvement tax. British law doesn't allow this kind of specialised local tax at the moment, but with the future of town centre shopping in the balance, some of the biggest names in British business think it's time for a change.
It's no good Marks & Spencer or anyone else who's really interested in driving its business forward, sitting back waiting for government or the local authority on their own to come and deal with the problems which we beset every day in the high street. We've got to get our sleeves rolled up and get stuck in and find our own solutions and try to work towards those solutions.
So would you give your support to an extra tax if that's what it takes?
If it was proven that there was need for extra tax of a limited nature, so that we're not signing a blank cheque, and that was the only way to make sure that town centre improvements were funded satisfactorily on a long-term basis, then yes, we would support it.
Businesses in town centres have got to now collectively match much higher standards that are provided out of town, which means they've got to act together, not against each other. It means, if you like, they've got to hang together rather than hanging separately.
So the message is cooperate or die?
Absolutely.
In Gravesend, the message of cooperation is well understood. Yvonne Howland from the cake shop has joined a business pressure group. But unlike Bristol, with its prosperous city centre, small retailers in Gravesend have little money to spare. The idea of paying for town centre revival gets a mixed reaction.
It's in all our interests at the end of the day to help finance whatever's necessary to keep any town safe, because at the end of the day it's our own interest we're looking after.
We desperately need the town centre management influence so that we're moving in the same direction. And this is all a question of funding. But clearly no one wants to pay more taxes. We're trying to recover, literally, and hold our own in face of competition from the superstores and the out-of-town shopping centres.
The day after this meeting, yet another business closed on Gravesend High Street, forced out by lack of trade. With the threat from out of town still growing, town centres are recognising they need new ways of meeting the challenge. The danger is that the remedies will come too late for many of today's town centre businesses.
A high-speed ferry sets off from Hong Kong for its daily journey into Guangdong province, China. It's heading for a city I'd never even heard of, but which happens to be, this year anyway, on the wild frontier of the new global economy. Here, under a communist flag, officials are tempting foreign businessmen with talk of rich capitalist pickings.
I hope more and more businessmen from Great Britain will come to invest here, because we still have great potential for them to make profits here.
Everybody talks about globalization these days, but few people do anything about it. Someone who is doing something is the British businessman Cliff Lure.
Can I help you?
Water.
Water.
And Coke.
Okay.
Cliff has devoted his life to polythene. He's travelling to his new factory in China.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Another 2 of those. And two cans of Coke.
Normally he's the only non-Chinese passenger on the ferry.
Hong Kong dollars.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's all.
How many?
A plain-spoken Derbyshire businessman 7,000 miles from home.
Your English? Better than my Chinese.
I think it's free. It's just yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So often have you made this trip now?
This is 22, 23 times from UK out to Xinhui, starting back in the early part of 1993.
So this is your regular commute to work?
It's become that way, yes, increasingly so.
A bit different from the office Mondeo, I should imagine.
Quite different, quite different. The change for me, being a manager in industry in Britain, to have the opportunity to travel out here, to travel around the Far East initially, to decide where we should place this factory, and to get to the point where we now have a successful factory. Never have dreamt of it. Never have thought it would have been something I would ever do.
China has a magnetic, hypnotic effect on many British businessmen, and it takes less than a day for Cliff to fly to Hong Kong and speed up the Pearl River into one of the fastest growing economic regions on the planet. We got off the ferry at Xinhui. By Chinese standards, it's a small boom town with just 800,000 people.
Just on the right-hand side here is the latest and greatest shopping plaza.
There's a lot of new stuff going up at the moment, isn't there?
An awful lot, yeah. It goes up very quickly. For us, 11 months from the first hole in the ground to putting the electricity into the building.
That's pretty good because you insisted on Western-style standards, haven't you?
We've pushed very hard for it to be built well, constructed properly. We've dragged people back regularly to redo where we weren't happy.
In Guangdong province, new factories are going up at a staggering rate. Many are British. Britain is the leading European investor in China, with over 1,000 joint ventures already set up. British money is pouring in, but with it, British jobs.
A Shropshire factory has closed with the loss of 150 jobs after the operation moved to China to cut labour costs. Now parent company British Polythene Industries will import plastic bags back into the UK for sale to major supermarket chains.
On the outskirts of Xinhui, on land which was paddy field a year ago, sits the factory where those British jobs went. And it tells you almost all you need to know about the global economy. Of course, Chinese people can be trained to make plastic bags as well as any British worker. A decade ago, that made little difference to anyone here or in China. Now it makes business sense for a British firm to build a factory in China, import the raw material, and ship the product back to Blighty. And that's very tough luck on the unemployed bag makers of Telford. Where do you get this raw polythene from?
From Saudi Arabia, from Malaysia, from Singapore. We've now got master batch being made locally here in China, although initially that came from UK and from Hong Kong.
And where are the machines from?
The machines are all Europeans, some from Germany and some from Denmark. Virtually the same as we would have in the UK, brought here and maintained in the same way.
I see that even the earplugs come from Brazil.
Even the earplugs come from Brazil.
It's a totally international factory.
Totally.
But the miracle ingredient that lets this factory keep up with the competition is the price of labour. In China, the people who run the machines are paid far, far less than in the UK, and this substantially cuts British Polythene's manufacturing costs. The saving on each bag is minuscule, a fraction of the penny each one costs to make, but it mounts up to a fortune as 21 million of them stream off the production line each week, and it allows British Polythene to compete in a cutthroat market.
People here earn between 1,300 and 2,000 renminbi per month for a 42-hour working week, and that is a salary that covers their housing allowance, their food allowance.
So that's about £100 a month?
The basic one is £100 a month for the person who's labouring and sweeping up, going up as per the training they've had.
How does that compare with what you were paying workers doing similar job back in Britain?
A worker in the UK will receive 10 times that amount.
This is British Telecom's network switching centre, an electronic hub in the global economy. Unimaginable quantities of information are converted into pulses, pushed up into space and zapped instantaneously all over the globe. $1.3 trillion is moved around the world by electronic blips every day. That's twice as much money as the major industrial nations keep in all their holdings. These days, mere governments are scarcely in the game.
Increasingly, I think borders are just disintegrating, and that it's now possible to trade products across borders in ways that it wasn't possible 10 or 20 years ago. And for people to move across borders is so much easier. So there's no doubt in my mind that the world is moving to one international economy.
The fantastic explosion in global communications is destroying the old political and economic borders which used to divide our world. In fact, the global market is now so powerful that it's forcing MPs and ministers to tear up their own rule books. It's reinventing the whole job of government. Our image of the world used to be a map covered in different colours, each clearly representing a separate nation-state. These days we see the planet's blues and browns and whites swirling around. None of these true colours has anything to do with our sense of nationhood.
You know, the question of who you are is a very important one, because this will change, ought to change. Because if you ask the Japanese, what are you? Then they would say, I'm a Japanese. Secondly, I'm Ken Omai. And perhaps 5 minutes later, you would say, yeah, I'm a global citizen. I think this will have to be completely reversed. We are the member of this global society, and so the global logic requires very transparent border and the disclosure of information, access from the individual to the best practice in the world. Eventually, that brings me to me the best quality of life at the lowest cost possible.
The lowest cost brings other costs with it. This machine is testing whether British plastic bags made in China will be strong enough for you to carry your Argentine beef, New Zealand wine and Kenyan beans across the car park to the Honda or the Volvo. The bags are sold for the world price rather than any British price, saving the average British family 5, maybe 6 pence in a week. We could all donate this sum for the relief of distressed plastic bag makers in Telford, but I don't suppose any of us will. We're just happy to pay less, even if it's an amount too small to notice. To the manufacturer, it's not even a saving. There's a new world price, there's no appeal, and he has to match it.
The supermarkets and the large shopping chains are not paying any less than they would pay from many other sources. That's because the market price has been lowered by the Far Eastern manufacturing market in the last 10 years.
How much per bag?
Maybe as much as 20%.
So that's what, about a third or a quarter of a penny per bag?
Yes, something in that area. It's not us that's making the savings, it's the supermarket people who are making the savings.
Well, okay, you're making the profits then, aren't you?
Well, we hope to maintain a profit by supplying them with both types of product, the UK-made product and the ones made here. For example, if you're doing a 6-week promotion for some particular product and you want to put it on your carrier bag, you're not going to buy it in China. You're going to have to buy it locally. And there's 2 marketplaces, and we want to supply them both.
The paddy fields of South China are rapidly being turned into factories by foreign investors who see governments as irrelevant at best and interfering at worst. With borders melting away, they can move their businesses wherever they wish, and they don't want government to get in the way. Like Greta Garbo, they much prefer to be left alone.
Jobs are going where economically they can be made. We've already seen some of our Far Eastern suppliers move from Malaysia to India because costs in Malaysia are becoming too expensive. There are other markets behind. There's Vietnam coming along. Laos hopefully will become settled and open up, maybe even Cambodia, and so you go on. I'm not a politician. I'm a businessman. My job is to manufacture products, sell them to the person who needs them and make a profit out of it. That's what I'm trying to do.
What would you say that the British government could do to facilitate the work of industry?
We've had no real involvement with government in coming here. Government really haven't got in the way, haven't caused us a problem, haven't been a factor. I, as a businessman, prefer it to remain that way.
The global economy is seeking out the people of Xinhui at incredible speed. I first came to China in 1984, and the increase in people's prosperity has been astonishing.
It's wonderful to see that these people now have the choice from their earnings to buy openly in the stores what they
Shop
want.
there selling Sony televisions, for example, which are just exactly the type that we'd expect to find in England.
There's the jewellery. The one we couldn't recognise is jewellery.
This is a clearance sale of jade jewellery. 12 years ago, that would have been inconceivable. Nobody wanted to buy what was offered in the empty shops and dingy markets.
People generally are now dressing in brighter clothes and beginning to maybe wear the things that they for many years have made locally here. My favourite little key making man here.
The recycled trainers there, they'd be...
There's 80% of China reportedly has not yet seen any glimmer of economic development whatsoever. So there's an awful long way to go here. This area will grow and become as rich as Hong Kong in the years to come, and they'll move on somewhere else.
At least 1,600 people have died in Japan's worst earthquake for half a century. Thousands of others have been injured and thousands of buildings destroyed. Good evening. We begin with the earthquake that devastated part of South Japan just before dawn. The number of dead is still rising, but but 1,600 people are known to have been killed. More than 1,000 others are still missing. The quake, which measured 7.2 on the Richter scale, struck just before 6 this morning. Its epicenter was the sparsely populated island of Awaji. The port of Kobe, 20 miles to the north, has borne the brunt of the casualties, but fires that raged through its streets have now been put out. The nearby cities of Osaka and Kyoto, both heavily populated, have also been badly hit.
With nightfall, the city of Kobe had turned into a vision of hell, fires burning out of control across the devastated area. The government has declared a state of emergency, and troops are being sent in to help with the rescue operation. Fire teams have been able to make little headway against the flames. Eyewitnesses have described a wall of fire being swept along by the wind. The tremor which brought such destruction in its wake was measured at 7.2 on the Richter scale, the worst earthquake to hit Japan for nearly half a century. The main tremor hit the cities of Kobe, Osaka and Kyoto at 5:46 in the morning. It was followed by several hundred aftershocks. Houses collapsed like cardboard. Many hadn't been built to withstand such force. Most people were still in bed, and many were trapped beneath the rubble of their homes. One American businessman staying in Kobe found his hotel room falling apart around him.
All the electricity, of course, went off, and my TV in my room flew maybe 3 or 4 feet towards my bed. My bed moved 4 feet. The building next to ours fell down on top of a car, almost totally. The whole house must have picked up and moved about 5 feet.
And a British journalist staying in Osaka, Japan's second largest city, also felt the force of the tremors.
A number of buildings have come crashing down, some bursting into flames. Power lines have also come down, blocking some of the main highways, and massive cracks have appeared in roads and pavements, where windows have broken, glass has been showered onto the streets, and water's pouring through some of the cracks in the roads where water mains have actually burst.
Even the elevated motorways, which should have been strong enough to withstand the earthquake, weren't. Huge sections of the Hashin Highway have collapsed, spilling trucks and cars onto their side and crushing anything beneath it. This bus was left balancing precariously on the edge as the road in front of it sheared away, its passengers a couple of feet from disaster. And trains were thrown off rails, which twisted and buckled before them. Rescuers searching through the rubble of the thousands of flattened buildings are working with the constant danger of aftershocks, which are still being felt. They have been able to pull some people from the wreckage, but for each one rescued, many others are still trapped. It's estimated more than 1,000 people are still missing. On Japanese television, they've been listing the names of the many people already known to have died. The death toll currently stands at more than 1,600, with thousands more injured. It's nearly 50 years since an earthquake claimed so many lives here. The country's Prime Minister has already spoken of the sense of shock felt by everyone.
This is the worst earthquake since the Great Kanto earthquake, and the government will do everything it can to help.
The Earth's crust is divided into a number of so-called tectonic plates, which move independently of each other. The Pacific plate is moving underneath the Eurasian plate, with Japan on the edge at the rate of 6.8 centimeters a year. When the plates get stuck, the tension builds up as the rock bends. When it can bend no more, it suddenly shifts, causing an earthquake. The shock waves from last night's earthquake were detected round the globe. At the British Geological Survey in Edinburgh, the seismograph left little doubt that this was a major quake, 7.2 on the Richter scale. There are about 20 of this size each year in the world, but rarely so close to large populations, causing such loss of life.
The scale of the devastation and human suffering in a country that suffered many earthquakes in the past is prompting questions as to how well prepared the Japanese authorities were for all this. Our science correspondent Susan Watts reports.
As the fires raged in the devastated historic port city of Kobe, Japan is coming to terms not only with a humanitarian disaster on a huge scale, but also with the apparent failure of its complex machinery for planning and preparing for earthquakes. How could one of the world's most technologically advanced of nations have been caught so unawares? Part of the answer may lie in Japan's dogged attachment to the belief that earthquakes can be predicted.
Where the Japanese differ from the rest of the world is they believe that earthquakes can be predicted. The rest of the world has come to the conclusion that they can't be predicted. The thing to do instead is to concentrate on mobilizing emergency forces. There are going to be red faces all over the prediction community, and I think there's going to be serious questions asked about funding of this kind of research in future.
Despite the huge financial resources the Japanese have poured into the science of prediction, this remains unreliable. Data goes back only 50 to 100 years.
Prediction is a long way off. In fact, you know, it's like the weather system. We can't predict the weather very well, and therefore earthquakes are just exactly the same. It's very difficult to predict earthquakes.
But it's not just prediction. Earthquake-proof design has also been thrown into question. It wasn't just older buildings that collapsed. New buildings gave way too. Most worryingly, up-to-date expressways that should not have succumbed.
That is a great worry, and we've seen in California that expressway structures are very difficult to build to withstand earthquakes, and that there are undoubtedly going to be lessons here, and we're going to probably have to rethink the way we design them. They're massive structures. They tend to be quite high up. You need long spans, which are difficult to deal with from the point of view of earthquake forces. And of course, because they're so long, they only have to start to fail in one place for the whole length to be affected.
Nowadays, engineers have an array of modern techniques at their disposal. Today, Bristol University was testing to destruction this supported wall on its earthquake shaking table. Computer simulation of quakes also plays a part.
Well, this example is a building that we looked at recently in Japan, on Tokyo Bay, in fact. It was a 5-story warehouse building.
The model shows how the warehouse withstands the tremors of a real quake. Each wall and the pile that supports it shakes to its own rhythm. Engineers use the results to decide how deep to sink foundations and how best to weigh down their buildings whilst keeping them flexible enough to bend as the earth moves. For ordinary people, today's message will be that prediction doesn't work and neither does engineering. So what went wrong?
Well, clearly they weren't built strongly enough to withstand this particular earthquake. Bear in mind, of course, it was a particularly severe one. It was a direct hit on a very large conurbation, very near the surface, so that the energy was all concentrated and delivered an enormous punch into Kobe. So it was a difficult one to withstand, but no, I accept it wasn't a total surprise. Japan should have been prepared.
As the Japanese brace themselves for aftershocks to the quake, they have an eye to the future. Buildings that have fallen in Kobe were built to exactly the same specifications as those in Tokyo, which now faces the latest warning from seismologists to expect its own big one any moment now. But of course, to a scientist, any moment now could mean tomorrow or any time in the next 50 years.
In Spain, more than 60 people are now known to have died after a campsite in the Pyrenees was smothered in mud in flash floods. The authorities say at least 80 people are still not accounted for, and the death toll is likely to rise as the rescue work goes on. 14 Britons were registered at the camp. Some have been injured.